Morning. Sorry, everybody. It's taken me a long time to figure out how to get on Zoom this morning. I'm glad it finally worked, and I'm glad to be with you. I've been a supporter of Puente for many years, and glad to see that Puente is doing work to support students even during this pandemic. So glad to be with you. I was looking in the chat at some of the things you've said, and so I want to offer some thoughts about whether or not we can use the pandemic as an opportunity to disrupt some things. So first, let me share my screen. And while we're waiting for that to get there, let me just start by saying that we know that the pandemic has had a really negative impact on kids throughout the country, especially our most vulnerable kids. In Los Angeles alone, it's estimated almost 40% of kids have not been able to have regular access to school, either because their internet access at home is a problem, or because they don't have screens, or they live in situations where they just really not conducive to learning at home. So this is, we know now also that the impact on mental health is is taking a toll. This is stressful. Many of us, including our children, have been stressed out, as I have been this morning with this trying to make Zoom work. So I don't want to minimize the negatives, but I do want to say that, like as is true after almost any other disaster, whether it be personal or a public disaster, opportunities are created too. So a few years ago, my house flooded, and we had to tear up the floors, tear out the walls, put in a new kitchen. When we put in the new materials, fortunately, we had the insurance money that allowed us to upgrade. We didn't just go back with the same old stuff. We saw the same thing after the Loma Prieta earthquake in San Francisco, where when the freeway that used to block the waterfront came down, they just tore it down. They didn't put it back up. They said, let's let people see the waterfront. So similarly, I want you to think about what could be different. If you can see my slides now, I want to share a quote from Hugh Vasquez. And he says, since we know that disturbance is required for change, and there's no doubt that disturbance is happening even as we speak, the question is, are we willing to use this opportunity to create the kind of educational system we want? We have learned that if we are going to change the system, we as individuals first have to see what the system is producing. Then we have to engage with others to design something different. And finally, we have to act. Similarly, Paul Revel says, can we make schools more responsive to student needs? And he writes, how do we make our school, education, and child development systems more individually responsive to the needs of our students? Why not construct a system that meets children where they are and gives them what they need inside and outside of school in order to be successful? Let's take this opportunity to end the one-size-fits-all factory model of education. So we've known for a while that schools don't really work well for lots of kids. We've had the deep and persistent disparities in achievement that are based on race and socioeconomic status. We know that kids in many schools who are the most vulnerable, particularly children of color, are most likely to be disciplined or to be placed in special ed and restrictive environments. We know that in too many schools, there's more emphasis on compliance and control than on empowering kids as learners, that we've relied too much on pressure and threats as a motivator for educators rather than providing clear guidance on how to do this work. So these are just some of the problems that we know are present in many of our schools. So moving on. So I want you to reflect on your schools and how accurately these characterizations describe what's going on in your schools. I also want you to think about your equity challenges at your school, because every school has its own culture. I also want you to start to imagine what might be possible. Can schools be places where a child's race, socioeconomic background does not predict how well they do? Can the culture and language of children be treated as assets and resources to be valued rather than negated through assimilation? Can we create schools where children are inspired, where their curiosity is encouraged, and their dreams are fed? And can we design school conditions where teachers feel appreciated and are able to teach with joy, passion, and inspiration? Now these might seem like awfully ambitious goals, but I would say if we don't aim there, we'll never get there. So I want you to think about what we need to move in that direction. Not long ago, Sir Ken Robinson passed away. Many of you might know his work. If you don't, I'd encourage you to Google him. His TED Talk has been viewed by more people than any other TED Talk. And it's all about changing the paradigm in education. And what he argues, and I certainly agree with, is that we need to move away from measuring and sorting kids based on some idea of their ability to developing talent in all children, knowing that all kids have talent they come with. We need to move away from pressure and threats to collaboration amongst teachers and in cultivating the intrinsic desire to learn in all kids. And we need to move away from using assessment to rank kids to using it to guide learning, and from teachers covering material to teachers cultivating a love of learning and empowering their students as learners. And then finally, as this pandemic has showed, we need to continue to work with our parents as partners rather than treating them as consumers. And all of this requires not merely a new program, but a new shift in our thinking about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So as we begin to think about how to create schools that are more responsive, I want you to think about child development and what we know. Are your schools developmentally oriented? Do you have a holistic approach that addresses the social, the emotional, and the physical needs of kids as well as their academic needs? We know from the neuroscience that the brain is like a muscle, which is why all children have to be stimulated, have to be challenged, and learning has to be made meaningful so that the kids embrace it. And then finally, we've got to understand the context in kids' lives and the challenges they face outside of school if we're going to be better able to respond to their needs in school. So what we want is to get schools to become better at doing what we're going to describe as adaptive work, basically focusing on the dynamic nature of educating kids, understanding their needs, having a vision and working with your team, your staff, and your parents to make sure that that vision is shared, and setting goals that are rooted in an understanding of students and their needs to make sure that our schools are responsive to the needs of all our kids. To do that, we have to move beyond the logistics of the moment, and we know that in many schools, the primary concern right now is how to open schools safely, how to test kids, how to make sure that we don't contaminate the adults, particularly those with pre-existing health conditions. And those are all very relevant and pertinent, but they can't be the only concerns. We've also got to think about what are the needs of our kids? What will their needs be like when they get back? How will we address the mental health needs that have emerged? Learning loss. How are we going to make sure that teachers are prepared to talk about issues of racial justice, which kids have been learning a lot about simply by watching the news and paying attention to social media? And then what are we going to need to do to continue to build upon the relationships with parents that have been so vital during this period? So we have good research that there are 5 essential ingredients that we should focus on to create the conditions in schools that allow all kids to thrive and good teaching and learning. And that is, we need a coherent instructional guidance system. Teachers need clarity about what they're teaching and what to do when kids are not making progress. We need to build the professional capacity of the staff, which means we need to tailor professional development to the individual needs of teachers. We need to work on building strong partnerships with parents that are rooted in trust and respect. We need a student-centered learning climate or culture that allows us to know our kids and lift the morale of our staff. And finally, we need shared leadership. This comes from research done by the University of Chicago, where they examined schools that serve kids well and they find that these are the 5 essential ingredients that must be placed. So here's an example of what it looks like when you see this in place. And I want to move to slide 19. And this is an image of a classroom here in Los Angeles. This is Hollenbeck Middle School. These are 8th graders. And as you can see, they're up out of their seat in a 90-minute math class. And the teacher is in the back talking to me. And that's because she's not in control of learning. The students are in control of learning. And when I was in that room, I heard noise, good, healthy, productive noise. Because when kids are working and interacting, that's how they learn. I often say that in too many schools, we expect kids to learn the way we teach rather than teaching kids the way they learn. Anybody who's ever taught middle school knows that kids learn through interaction. They learn by discussing things, by modeling. That's what was occurring in this classroom. The fact that these were all English learners, the fact that they were all low income, did not mean the teacher had to treat them as if they had to be talked down to or that they had to be told what to do. She was not afraid of empowering them as learners, which means they're not simply learning math. They're also learning how to work together, how to cooperate, how to work with people who are difficult and solve problems. They're learning the social and emotional skills that we know are key to success in life. And because the teacher's teaching this way, she can now differentiate support to kids and become the facilitator of learning, because now she knows which kids need support, which kids need more time and attention, and she's able to divide her time that way to provide the support. So I want you to think about your schools and how many of your kids get to learn this way, because this is the way our kids actually learn. When I talk about the need for learning to be developmentally appropriate, this is developmentally appropriate learning for middle schoolers. So who are your teachers that can teach this way, and how do you give teachers who can't, who are afraid? Some teachers look at a picture like this and they say, well, I'm afraid of losing control. Well, they need a chance to see highly skilled teachers at work who are not afraid and what they do to create the conditions. You know, this teacher started by telling me, I know my kids. I know which kids can work together and which kids should never work together. I know which kids can help other kids. And it actually makes her job easier. She didn't start the year this way. She had to get the kids ready for it by getting to know them. So I want you to think about what you're doing to get your kids into a climate where they can learn in these kinds of ways. If we could go back to slide 16, the big challenge of equity work is, as the fourth slide shows you, eliminating the barriers that get in the way of serving all kids. And the most common barriers have to do with our expectations. And so I want you to think about, what are we going to do when schools reopen and we're back with our colleagues and back with our students to make sure that our expectations are high, that we're providing the guidance and support kids need, and that we keep in mind that our goal is not simply to raise achievement. Our goal is to get kids excited about learning so they understand the power of knowledge to make a difference in their lives. I want to make sure there's time to take some questions, so let me stop there and open it up for some questions. Thank you.
I have a question, Dr. Noguera.
Yes, thank you.
So one of the things that that you said was moving away from measuring and sorting to identifying and developing students' talents. And I'm wondering, how to do that when, everything about the system and the state governance pushes so hard against that. And you know, I feel like when we do it, we're doing it under the radar and against the flow. And I'm wondering if there's a way to do that that's less painful for staff and students. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the good news is that ESSA, right, Every Student Succeed Act, frees us up from some of the testing requirements. And the state is even, as we know, they last year rightfully allowed us to they suspended testing. So that means we shouldn't be as fixated on this preparing kids for standardized tests as we've been in the past. Now I think that opens up, can we use formative assessments? Can we look at student work to guide? Because we do need to assess, we do need to evaluate how much kids are learning and what their needs are, but we need to make sure that it's being used not to rank kids, but to diagnose learning needs, to identify areas where more support is needed, and to give kids meaningful feedback. Now, if you're in a district where they're still stuck on the old way of No Child Left Behind, of standardized testing, then that is a problem. I want to acknowledge that. But there are many districts that are, because of the pandemic, are being forced to look differently at these issues. In Los Angeles, we're seeing evidence that grades for kids have gone down. And we know in part that's because either lack of access or lack of motivation. So there's going to be a renewed emphasis on how do we get kids motivated to learn again. And I think that's going to put more emphasis on getting kids engaged rather than simply thinking about achievement, the measuring and sorting that I was referring to. So I'd encourage you, if you're not in a district that's so open to this idea, to raise it with your colleagues, with your principal, and try to get them to see that there's the path to achievement is through engagement, right? And I think that's something that we missed with No Child Left Behind.
Dr. Noguera, I got a question. I read your book, Creating the Opportunity to Learn, about the achievement gap. And I just think when people always talk about the achievement gap, in your book, you stated that the achievement gap hasn't moved much since the 1970s. Now, but the achievement gap, when people talk about it, is like, they always talk about it in a one-dimensional format, whereas you talk about it as like being multi-dimensional. You know, it's an instructional gap, a teaching gap, a generational gap. My only fear is, like with COVID, teachers have to teach a lot of these standards, and they have less instructional minutes in order to cover all these standards. Now, right now, we're getting a lot of talking with parents, talking with students, that they're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of work. Now, my question would be, is there any way that we could, you know, focus on the meat and potatoes of the standards, like under the COVID umbrella? Because I think that we're trying to take the traditional factory model and embed it into this new educational framework operating under the COVID umbrella. And my only fear is that the achievement gap is just going to get wider with this whole COVID situation. I just want to know what strategy, like you said, even though we're functioning, you know what I mean, under this umbrella, there's an opportunity for us to get a hold of this. So I just wanted to know your thoughts.
Yeah, if anything, this pandemic's exposed the opportunity gaps, right? Think about the kids who come from a home where you have parents who have the time and the education to support their children, have a huge advantage over the kids whose parents are essential workers, or the kids whose parents are just so stressed out they can't support their kids. So I think as we see the glaring inequities of the moment, now that calls on us to come back and say, okay, what are we going to do differently? So one of the things we have to prioritize, and I've heard many superintendents say this, is we have to prioritize the needs of kids, the mental health needs, the social needs of kids, before we fixate on the academic needs. Some have said, put Maslow ahead of Bloom, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense. At the same time, we still have to come back to making sure kids get that opportunity to learn, which is what we wrote about in the book. And getting there means that we have to make sure that, first of all, we understand child development, that we're meeting the needs of kids developmentally, that it's stimulating and challenging, because kids get bored if what we're presenting is not very engaging and interesting. And then on top of that, we have to really focus on creating the social conditions in our classrooms. Kids need to feel safe, right? And by safe, I don't simply mean physically safe, I mean emotionally safe, because kids will not let you know that they don't understand something if they're intimidated or afraid of being ostracized. So we need to create a climate where kids support each other and where it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to make mistakes. And you know, if you think about the way a child learns to play a video game, they don't start with a lecture, they learn by doing, they learn through the mistakes, and they learn through mastery. Those are the kinds of learning experiences we want to create for kids. And the last thing I would say is we want to tap into the curiosity of kids, because when kids are curious and they're seeking information, they will become independently motivated learners. So we have to have, you know, Carol Dweck, who many of us have know her work now about mindset. She said, if you want kids to have a growth mindset, the adults have to have one first, right? They have to see their kids as being capable of becoming independently motivated learners. And if we start there, I think we're going to do this work very differently than we have before.
Thank you.
Dr. Noguera?
Yes.
I see in my school in particular, I have a high school. A lot of the kids are becoming disinterested in school. They're losing that motivation factor. And I know that my teachers are doing, I can't say 100%, but the majority of our teachers are doing whatever they can to help students connect and help them understand this period that we're going through. It's affecting everybody emotionally, and because of that, it's bringing up. I live and work in a very impoverished community, so we have all those issues. We have the lack of connectivity. We have parents that are working 2 jobs or are essential workers. I mean, everything has landed on their laps. And I know that in our district, we're pushing everything. That's the other thing. We're just, maybe that's what it is. We're pushing too much. We're trying to give teachers all of these tools to work with our kids. And yet I see some of my best teachers still struggling to get the kids to connect, to get the kids to engage, to get the kids to talk. I just dropped into a class yesterday. I visit regularly, and I mean, the screens are on, but you can't see the student and they're not speaking. What else can we do to get them motivated, to get them engaged in their learning again?
You know, it's hard, because I would have said if we'd started by checking in with kids, really working on the relationship first, then it's easier to get the kids to turn on their camera, get the kids to, you know, to become, feel safe and encouraged to participate. Now what we have to do is reclaim them again as learners. Because as you said, many kids are losing motivation and very discouraged based on the situation we're in. And I'd say reclaiming means starting back with the relationship, going back to the relationship, doing some things to bring some fun to the learning and fun to the experience. You know, kids miss their friends. So why, instead of maybe going right into a lesson, start by getting kids to tell some stories, getting kids to sing together. I don't know what age your school is. Oh, you said high school. I work with a high school here in LA, and that's exactly what they do. They do a lot of check-in. They still have advisories, meeting during this period. They're doing some games. They're doing some community service together. These kinds of things have helped to keep the relationship strong. And the community this high school is in has one of the highest rates of COVID in the state right now. It's Pacoima. But the school even before the pandemic, despite being 100% low income, 100% Latino, has the 4th highest graduation rate in the city. It's Social Justice Humanitas High School. And they do a lot to invest in the relationships. So I would really encourage you, that's where the emphasis needs to be right now. Build the relationships, and then we can create the climate for learning.
Thank you.
Buenos días, Dr. Noguera. We're always so excited to have you as part of our Puente Familia. I just was thinking of the conversation you were having about talking to principals and other administrators about the current emotional needs of our students versus just the academic. So I was wondering, should we also be doing advocacy at the state level in terms of with the State Office of Education and with some other legislators in terms of trying to bring a different point of view into the necessities of students and how we measure student talent and success?
Absolutely. You know, and the current state superintendent, Tony Thurman, if you don't know this, he's a former social worker himself. And also, you know, has experienced, you know, when he was a child, a number of hardships. So he's, I think, particularly sensitive to this. And I think so in the State Department, we have some allies that'll work with us. Now the question is, can we get the legislature and the governor's office to also recognize that as a result of this pandemic, we're going to have to do what we can to get resources to the communities where it's needed. You know, fortunately, you know, there'll be a Biden administration. Hopefully there's gonna be some relief coming to the states soon that'll go back so that we don't make these terrible cuts that were anticipated in education. But we're gonna have to prioritize getting resources to schools so that, because we do have a mental health crisis on our hands right now. And it's not just the children. There are many adults themselves who are suffering during this period. Maybe even some of the people on this call today have been stressed out. We've just faced so many challenges between the fires, the pandemic, the economic uncertainty, and the election. It's just been quite a difficult year. So we shouldn't pretend that this is normal, but we must ask the state to provide the support that's needed. My hope is that between the governor and the state superintendent, we will get that support so that our schools can address the needs, the great needs that we know are there amongst our children.
Gracias.
Dr. Noguera, I know that you've gone over the time that you were able to be with us. I want to thank you so very much for your generosity, of time, for your friendship with Puente, and I hope you get a chance to look in the chat, because I hope you get to see how your remarks and your wisdom have been received, and how, you know, how much our administrators and the teachers and counselors who are also in the chat have been looking at this as an opportunity for a paradigm shift. And I think are very, very grateful to have had this opportunity to hear from you on that topic. So we are going to continue, and if you can stay with us, that would be wonderful, but I think you have to.
I could stay, but let me just say goodbye to everyone. I really apologize for the technical difficulties. That's part of the moment we're in too, right? That we're constantly having to figure out how to make the technology work. And I know that that's one of the issues facing our teachers and kids. So we experienced it too this morning, but I'm glad I got to be with you. And I don't want to make it anything sound simple. Nothing is simple about this moment we're in. So we need to be kind with each other. We need to be patient and try to be understanding. We will get through this, but you know, the light is not there yet at the end of the tunnel, but hopefully it will be soon. So I wish you all the very best. Thank you for having me today. Adelante, Puente.
Thank you so much.